Hi there. Welcome to My Other's Keeper. I have my friend Cheryl here, and we're going to talk about her family's journey to become a larger family. It was not an easy one, but it is something that a lot of people really have had to deal with. And I'm really grateful that, Cheryl, that you've decided to come and talk with us about that.
Hmm, I'm happy to be here.
Excellent. So tell me a little bit about yourself,
Oh, like just in general,
just in
without kids.
general, without kids. Who
um,
am I without
well,
my children?
yeah,
Yeah.
like I am. There is a me beyond my children.
Yeah.
um, I am married. I've been married for almost 41 years. We
Wow.
got married quite young, which is kind of part of, I guess, our story as well.
Mhm.
Um, I was just 20 when we got married. I was a public health nurse. I'm still a nurse, but I was a public health nurse for 32 years and loved it. Loved working with families, and that's kind of key in my story as well, because I taught prenatal classes and I taught parenting classes and I visited new moms as a very big part of my work,
Mhm.
and worked with teenage moms at high schools as well.
Mm.
When my grandsons were born, um, my oldest grandson is 8, and
Wow.
my youngest grandson is 6. And when the second one was born, I decided to semi-retire from public health, so that I wouldn't have to work full time anymore, and could see more of my family. And I now work for the College of Nursing as a clinical instructor in community.
Oh,
So,
very
yeah,
good. Awesome.
yeah.
Community nursing is so important. I mean,
Mm,
gracious.
thank
You
you.
can be a personal nurse, but when you look at the needs of our society in general,
Mhm,
we need public nurses. We need more public health in general.
mhm.
It's
Yeah.
just not something that does get enough,
Mhm.
I don't know, attention or whatever
I
the
always
rest time.
I always talk to my nursing students about the fact that really prevention, which was the focus of my work, saves a lot of money to the healthcare system, and yet
Yep,
only gets a very, very, very thin slice of the pie.
it
But on
does.
the other hand, if my mom has a heart attack, I want her to get emergency care, right?
Absolutely.
And so it's not easy for people making those decisions when there's limited dollars and the needs are great everywhere. It's tough. Yeah.
That's precisely it, yeah. You
Mhm.
have to kind of really weigh and balance and all of that. Um,
Yeah.
we could get into a great big long discussion on our healthcare
Yeah.
system, couldn't
Yeah.
we?
We
That's not
could.
today's discussion.
No, thankfully, I'm not an expert on that.
Even though as a
Yeah.
frontline person, you would
Yeah.
definitely have some expertise. The
Mm.
full rounded version is not
Yeah.
what you have, but what you do have
Yeah.
is a rounded version on adoption.
Yes.
And I would love to discuss that with you tonight.
Yes. Yes.
So
I
how
love
many
to talk about
people
it.
how
Sorry.
many people are in your nuclear family?
Okay. So we first adopted my son. Um,
Mhm.
and he is now almost 30. And then 3 years later, my daughter we adopted. Yeah. And
Okay.
so I always like to tell the story of my son wanted a sibling very, very badly. And we went through an adoption through an agency at that time that no longer is operating, but it was Christian Counseling.
Yep.
And so if you adopted one child when they were 1, you could put your name in for to be on a waiting list for
Oh,
another child. And so we
okay.
did that immediately, and we're waiting. And my son is like almost 3 and wants a sibling very badly. And so he said, "Well, mommy, can we pray for one?" And I said, "Sure we can," right? And I still remember being like in the entrance of our house. He sat on the stairs and he said, "Dear God, please send me a brother or sister. Amen." And literally 3 weeks later, we got the phone call that we had been chosen to be the adoptive parents for my daughter. So when we went to go tell my
Oh,
son, it was
wow.
like, you know how you prayed for that? The only thing
God
is,
answers prayer real quick.
I know. The only thing is about maybe a year or two after my daughter was born, then he says, when do you think God's going to send us another baby? And I said, well, like, I don't think that's going to happen. Like, and he looked at me, his eyes went up like, I don't need you. You're just the middle person. And he
We're
went
gonna
like,
chat.
could I have another sibling? It's like I was
Yeah.
superfluous to the process.
Well,
Yeah,
you kind of were. I mean,
I
truly,
was.
you're just the carer of the
Yeah,
children.
that's
Yes.
right.
All right.
Mm.
So tell me about a little bit about the background of why you and your husband adopted.
Yeah. So, like I said, we married young. We were like 20 and 21. So,
Hmm.
really didn't see that there'd be any trouble. We both had no health concerns at all. We were young and healthy. And so, because I was still in school and then my husband went back to school, we didn't plan on having a baby right away. But
Hmm.
ironically, it was when I was about 25. I was working for public health already. And at that time, we ran a parenting group for adoptive parents, for prospective adoptive parents. And
Okay.
I ran one of the parenting groups. And I just remember thinking, oh my goodness, like I just connected with these parents so much. And I said,
Hmm.
here are these like fabulous people, who are just want a baby so badly and they can't have one. And here we can. And we're just like waiting for the right time, right? And that
Yeah.
was kind of what led us to make the decision, let's not wait any longer. And in
Right.
retrospect, I'm glad we didn't, because it started kind of the process. We were still pretty young when we started the infertility journey. So you start that whole journey, and I know lots of people equate it to a roller coaster, and I would say that's the case. Emotionally, that was just a place I would never want to go back to, and I would not wish on anyone. Um,
No.
just a really difficult place, and probably, my personality didn't make it any easier, in my life experience, because I was one of those people who kind of had a relatively easy life, I guess I would say. Like,
Okay.
things, I wasn't like I had to work for things, like I had to work hard in
Right.
school, and but things came relatively easily. Like, I met the love of my life when I was 16, right?
Oh
And so
wow.
I didn't have to like wait, right?
Yeah.
And I guess I didn't have a lot of experience waiting, right? I applied to go into nursing, I got in, I graduated. I got my dream job like right out of university. Which was kind of unheard of. To go right into public health in Saskatoon was not a common
Wow.
experience at that time. And I went right into like a full time permanent position. So I had led a very blessed life.
Yeah.
Um, and so I think, though, I now look at it and say, okay, like none of that was me. That was all God just giving me good gifts. But at the
Hmm.
time, I thought I could take the credit for some of that. And so when we started to try to get pregnant, you start and you're all excited, and you think, oh, this could be the time. And then, okay, month goes by after month, and it's okay, like now it's like, it's not happening, and you start to
Yeah.
worry a little bit. But we're young, there's no reason why we
Yeah.
shouldn't. It just takes longer for some people, right? And at this point, we weren't telling anybody yet. So it was just something that we were dealing with. And I started to talk to my doctor about it. And he's like, well, if nothing's happened after a year, we'll send you to like a gynecologist.
Hmm.
So we reached the year mark. I got sent to a gynecologist, and we started kind of
Hmm.
the testing. All, excuse me, all the initial testing didn't really show anything. So again, there was really no explanation for like why this was happening.
Hmm.
And it wasn't till would have been maybe 3 years later, 3 or 4 years later, that
Hmm.
we went for some testing in the Calgary Infertility Clinic and finally found a possible cause. And we're
Okay.
given very low chances of
Mm.
of actually conceiving without help.
Mm-hmm.
But our chances of conceiving with help weren't really that much better. So we're kind of left
Yeah.
in this weird situation. And so we did try some of the infertility treatments that were open to us. But then at one point we were um, just feeling the heaviness of it all and decided to take a break, and never went back. Just I
Yeah.
was much happier not getting on that roller coaster all the time. So
It's
then
really,
we
yeah.
were left with contemplating adoption, and I always think it's ironic because if you would have asked me years before that, well, what if you can't have children? I would have very kind of blithely said, oh, we'll just adopt. Like that would be an easy choice. Um,
And an easy process,
yeah,
right?
and even
Like,
without the process, it wasn't an easy choice. Even
really?
though my husband and I always had wanted children, we didn't like when it came down to it, there were so many questions we had and possible
Mm-hmm.
concerns. And so we went to a meeting at social services, which I think is the most depressing meeting I've ever been to in my life, because the room was filled with adoptive couples. And we were basically told that uh, we'd probably wait 8 to 10 years if you would be chosen. So at that
Oh,
point, I had
wow.
already, like, before that time, once you got on a list, it was just like when your name came up and you were down the list, then you'd get chosen. But then the whole
Mm-hmm.
idea of having birth mothers choose the adoptive parents came into play, like with open
Mm.
adoptions, which is a
Mm-hmm.
really good thing, right? But it
Mm-hmm.
would mean that you possibly would never be chosen, right? So
Yeah.
there was no
No.
guarantee.
Yeah.
And so I remember leaving that meeting just so discouraged, and we actually never really put our names in for adoption. So I don't know, like, and then so it started the whole. We actually came to a point where we were looking into like other agencies. Christian counseling had just opened here, but their waiting
Mm.
list was full. Like they weren't even accepting people on their waiting list. And then I remember there was one that opened in Alberta, and we actually considered moving to Alberta because you had to be an Alberta resident, but didn't
Right.
feel that there was integrity in the fact that we would intend to move back here. So, like, if a
Yeah.
prospective birth mother chooses you because she wants you to be close, and then you turn around and move, that's not honest. And so in the whole process, I didn't want to be one of those women that was so desperate for a baby that yeah, that I wasn't prepared to do the right thing, even
For
though
sure.
it's maybe tempting.
It
um,
is. Yeah.
mhm. And so then we had actually given up. And then I don't know if you want, am I going on too much? Do you want the whole story? There was a
No, it's fine.
series of we had a series of closed doors, and then all of a sudden they started opening. So it seemed like once we made the decision, yes, we wanted to adopt, we were looking into international adoption. We were looking into kind of locally private adoptions, trying to get our name on waiting lists for agencies. And it just seemed like every door closed.
Mm.
And so we had actually, I don't know if we'd really given up, but a part of me certainly had given up. And decided we were just going to buy a condo downtown. We were going to travel. We were going to, enjoy a lifestyle that maybe we couldn't have if we had kids. And then
Mhm.
some friends of ours had gone to British Columbia. And while they were there, they met a couple who had adopted a baby through an agency in Seattle that adopted half African American babies. So apparently
Mm.
they had difficulty finding families for babies in the States because of some of the racism
Oh,
that
that's terrible.
that existed. Like white families didn't want them and black families didn't want them, and we were like, we don't care, we just want a
That's
child.
right. Do they
And
have red blood?
yeah, and
Yeah.
so uh we contacted the agency, and we're quite excited because it sounded like, we might only have to wait a year, but we were told we needed to contract someone to do a home study. So they come and they interview. For those who aren't familiar with home studies, somebody comes to your home, they interview you and your husband separately. They ask you almost every imaginable question about your life, and then they put it all in a document for the birth mother to read so she can get to know you. So we went through this process and did the home study, and started to have a little bit of hope again. While that was happening, while we were doing the home study, a friend of ours met a young girl who found herself pregnant and said she wanted to adopt her baby out, place her baby for adoption. And so she told them about us. And she's like, yeah, that would be great. I want them to adopt my baby. And just our feeling was that this was a huge decision for a birth mother to make, and that she shouldn't make it without counseling and without any kind of pressure. Just, it's an unimaginably difficult situation.
Absolutely.
I obviously don't know of it from their point of view, but just watching what my children's birth mothers have gone through, it's a horrible decision to have to make. And you feel like you'll never be happy again, because either choice you make is going to be difficult. And so we referred her to Christian counseling, and we said, like, we weren't even on the waiting list there then yet. And we said, if you still want to go through with it, maybe they can assist us through the process, but first you need to make sure you make this decision. So she went to the agency and she said, like, I want to come for counseling, but this is who I want to adopt my baby. And so what was interesting is that got us on the waiting list. So all of a sudden, out of the blue, we got a letter saying, you're on the waiting list to be on the waiting list. But like, they actually put our name in the system. So up until that point, like, our name wasn't in the system, right? So we're on the waiting list. And so interestingly enough, this young lady chose to keep her baby. So, but it started the doors opening for us at the agency. So we're still pursuing this adoption through Seattle, because we didn't know what else might open up. And all of a sudden we get a phone call from somebody at Christian Counseling that says, hey, we've got a birth mother who's looked through all of the home studies we have that kind of meet her qualifications, I guess. So they would give some general parameters, like what age, what income level, education, religious background, all those sorts of things. And they said, like, you meet every one of her requirements. And so she'd like to read your home study. So our home study was just in draft form yet. And so we phoned our social worker up, and she was leaving on holidays the next day. Like, had they phoned a day later, we would have missed it, right? And so we got it from her. Our names were still in it. Usually your names aren't in it. And then we were told the birth mother was coming in on Friday to look at a number of the files. Well, by Monday, we still hadn't heard anything. And so I'm at work, I'm in my office, and I'm thinking, and I'm phoning my husband and saying, well, obviously we didn't get picked, right? And I'm crying, and he's saying, well, why don't you come home for lunch? And anyways, and then I think I did go home for lunch. Actually, I came back and I got a phone call, and it was the social worker saying that my son's birth mother had chosen us. And I just can't even describe what that felt like. Like, I was just like, it was just disbelief. I think I said, you're kidding. Like a social worker would kid about that. Let's just,
I'm getting goosebumps even just thinking about it. So just,
and let's just hold on, they're getting a baby. And then, anyways, and so of course I rushed home to tell my husband, and we were so excited. We were just like ecstatic about it. And then the process went fairly, we still had to meet her and make sure that she still wanted, right, to choose us. And that's probably the most nervous I've been in my like entire life. I was so nervous.
Mhm.
I called her by the wrong name.
Oh, no.
And then I thought, oh, there, I've gone and done it. Like now, and it's funny because years later we talked, and she didn't even notice because she was so nervous that we wouldn't like her,
Yeah,
and that we would say no to her. And so just like, a teenage
yeah,
girl does not appreciate what an adoptive couple is going through, right? So I
for
never even
sure.
thought of it would be nervous, right? Because she had
Yeah,
gone through all these files and had chosen us. And we were her first choice. And so if we said no to her, then she would always be giving her child like second choice, right? Anyways,
yeah.
she's pretty special. If you want to know a little bit about my son's birth mother, he was
Sure.
born on Thanksgiving Day, and he was born in a small hospital in Saskatchewan. And so she had said we could come to the hospital. We weren't in the room when he was delivered, but we could be in the hospital. And she ended up having a cesarean section. Her mom was with her.
Mm,
But then we were going to get to see him a couple of hours later. And it was actually Thanksgiving Monday. And
mhm.
so we went in and we're all excited. And the very first thing she said to us was, "Isn't it great that he was born on Thanksgiving Day? Because you're thankful for him and I'm thankful for you." Like, and I would say that that probably tells you most of what you need to know about what kind of a person she is. Like,
Oh,
probably
for
just
sure.
one of the most generous people I've ever met, right? And my
Yeah.
daughter's birth mother is equally lovely. They both have very different personalities, but but she's just so generous and so positive, and both of them have always been so supportive of us as parents, that it's made the process easy. Yeah.
Oh, that is so wonderful.
Mhm.
Have you kept in contact with them at all, or just kind of
Mhm.
things have kinda
Yeah,
gone
we
away,
have.
or
Um,
Oh, okay.
so when we adopted through Christian counseling with an open adoption, you actually write up a contract. So we
Oh,
set up a
okay.
contract as to what our communication would look like in those first years
Mm,
until your
mhm,
child's old enough that they can make some choices about what they want. Um,
right.
and so to be honest with you, after a few months in, I couldn't even tell you what the contract said because we just became very comfortable um, with spending time together, and we just kind of went by, as long as we feel comfortable with what the requests are, then we'll say yes. If we're not
Oh,
comfortable, like, well, of course we would always meet whatever the contract said, but
yeah.
if there were things above and beyond that, like we attended my son's birth mother's wedding with with with
Nice.
yeah, with our son, and sat at the table with some of her family members. So that was pretty cool, right? It was cool
That
for us to
is.
meet them all, and so we enjoyed that. She moved away. I can't remember how old
Mm,
my son was when she moved to Alberta, and so then we've had less contact. So, like with social media, we can um, ma- maintain contact. Of course,
mhm.
I would usually phone her on Mother's Day and birthdays and Christmas and that sort of thing. I would send pictures. Um, and so, but she's had she's had a lot of stuff going on in her life, and so hasn't always been able to, due to health reasons, hasn't always been able to be here. Like, but she was invited to my son's like high school grad and to his wedding and all of those sorts of things. And my daughter's birth mother, we saw her and her family quite a bit when my daughter was younger, and then there were a few years where she chose to just take a step back for a little bit. She felt like she had given my daughter a really she said, I've given her a good family. She's doing well. And she just, for her own mental health, needed to take a step back for a little bit,
Yeah.
but has reconnected. And so, which I love, because I love her. I would like to see both of them more. And I like to think, of course, I love them because they made me a mother. They gave me children, but I love
Yeah.
them for themselves, because both of
Yeah.
my children, like, I see so much of their birth mothers in them.
Oh,
Like, both
wow.
of them, um, if you know my son and then you meet his birth mother, you go, oh yeah, like, it's obvious. And
Uh-huh.
my daughter, maybe not in appearance so much, but has a very similar warm, sweet, generous nature like her birth mother, and is creative, and um, yeah. And so I always feel like um, I love them for themselves too, because of those
Hmm.
personality traits.
Hmm. Well, that is so wonderful. Well, that is so good.
Hmm.
When your son's birth mom got married, how old was he? Like, would he had any concept whatsoever about what was going
No, you
on?
wouldn't remember. I'm
Okay.
trying to think. Was he two? My husband just walked in. I'm thinking he was two, because it was before my daughter was born.
Mm.
And I don't think
Mhm.
it would have been a year later. He was a
Okay.
toddler, maybe
Okay.
one and a half. Might have been one and a
Okay.
half, something like that.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. No, it
Cool.
was good. And I welcome, I welcome contact from both of them. And I had my moments sometimes, like when my son was little, I had to get my head around sharing him, you
Mm.
know.
Yeah.
And I remember, I was very comfortable with birth mother. We had been told that it's wise to start talking to your child about adoption from, like, the moment they're born, right? So
Yeah.
even before they could speak, I would say, oh, we're going to see your birth mother today, right? And some of those sorts of things on their birthday, would always tell them the story of when they were born and how they came to be a part of our family. And so you get used
Full.
to kind of using those terms. But I
Yeah.
remember one time, my son's birth mother wrote a letter for him, because she had made him a little scrapbook of some things that we kept
Nice.
for him. And, and she had wrote a little letter for him, and she signed it your birth mummy. And I remember, like, having a moment of, okay, I'm okay with birth mother. But I had a little moment of, like, birth mommy, like, I'm mommy, right? And then,
Yeah.
and then I come to the realization that I am sitting there holding my son and rocking him, and I
Mhm.
get to see him every day, and I get to spend all this time with him and raise him, and he will call me mommy. Um, and so it's very selfish to not share that, right?
I would
And
say selfish,
so,
but not necessarily. It's
well, but
I
you have those moments. But
yeah.
I think in some ways it's made it easier for me as a mother to realize that they're not mine. Like, they
Right.
don't belong to me. They,
Right.
God has gifted them into our lives, that we can share life together, but ultimately they belong to Him.
Yeah.
But that I think it helps me not to, even things like now, when they're married, if they're not here for Christmas Day, that's okay. Like, as long as we get to see them over the holidays, they don't have to
Right.
be here on that day. Like,
Right.
I you can share them with other family members. And my son had, like, five or six other mothers growing up, because we live on a farm, and he would hang out with his friends in town at their houses. So
Yep.
he had lots of mothers. So
Yep.
so it's good I got used to sharing him early.
There was only one mom who he would run to if he had a skinned knee, though, and that would be you.
Yeah, well, probably. Yeah.
Skinned knee or broken heart. Let's hope it'd be you.
Mhm.
Maybe not. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, and you know what? I think I think part of it, I realized as they get older that like you hold all their memories, right?
Yes.
I'm the one who holds what they were like as children, right? And even my husband always teases me that I always wanted to make happy family memories, right? And we would plan these things so we could make good memories. And then sometimes the kids would be crabby or whatever. And he said, "Oh, are we making memories yet?" Right. But I had an epiphany one day because my son was sitting at the kitchen table with like four of his friends. They were all like
Mhm.
teenagers. And they're talking about times they got into trouble with their moms or dads. And they're
Oh,
laughing and telling stories about, remember when I did this, and mom was so mad, and all these sorts of things. And I realized that family memories aren't just good, happy things,
no.
right? And that sometimes when you're not in the heat of that moment anymore, and you look back, you can laugh about it. And
Yeah.
I think, before that, I thought, oh, all those times have to be positive and these warm, fuzzy things. But it really
Yeah.
is just sharing life together. And even
Absolutely.
going through, remember the Christmas when everything went wrong, but it becomes a part of your shared life
I have
together.
one of those. I
You
had a
have,
few of those.
but it is
Yes,
part of it, and
absolutely.
it takes some of the pressure off.
Yeah.
It takes some of the pressure off that it's not like every moment, it's just sharing the time, right?
Yeah.
It's just that you were the one that got to be there for all of those things.
Yeah. And I've actually
Yeah.
found both with my mom and with my daughters, things that I will remember that I thought was a precious memory, like just so
Yeah.
amazingly precious. The other has no clue what happened there. They're like,
Yeah.
what do you mean there's this? And then there's my daughter. She's like, Mom, do you remember when this? Do you remember? No,
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
No clue.
And then that was
So yeah,
significant for her.
absolutely. Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
that's kind of the way memories are fickle, I guess,
Yeah. Yeah.
to a degree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think I like, it doesn't really matter in a way what you're called, right?
Right.
I did have a little initial, and every now and then I have a little twinge when somebody, asks me about my kid's real mom.
Oh,
you know, like I'm the one who was up with them. I'm the one who cleaned them up when they threw up, and you
they
know,
have one
um,
real mom.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so, but I also, appreciate the fact that most of the time that's not what people mean, right?
Yeah.
Like
Right.
they don't know the right vocabulary to use,
They don't.
and
And they're not
so they're
trying to be
just
hurtful, right?
no,
That's
no,
probably the last thing on their minds.
yeah, yeah. And I think it's easier. I was probably more sensitive about all those things, like new when we were new into the adoption journey.
Mm,
I
mhm.
remember asking. There was another family that I had met, and their kids were older. And I remember asking her about her experience and asking about adoption and these things. And she says, we just get busy being a family, right? And we're not always thinking about that.
No, that's for
And
sure.
I now understand what she meant, because of course you never forget that they're adopted, but
Yeah.
you just get busy being a family. And
Yeah.
so it's not like it's the focus or the thing you're thinking about all the time.
Right. Yeah.
It
When you
comes
were
up when
going
they have
through
to do
your
like a family tree at school or something like
Oh,
that,
for
right?
sure. Absolutely. Yep. That's something that Tanya, my sister, my I
Mm,
hate to say my half sister, she's my
yeah,
sister. Anyway,
yeah,
but that's what she would say. She's like, "Okay, yeah, no, I have no idea. I was adopted. That's it.
yeah,
That was the end of the
yeah,
conversation." And like yourself, her family was very open right from the get-go.
mm,
Like this
yeah,
is who it is. This is where you're from. This is how we got you, and we're so happy to have you, right?
yeah,
And
yeah,
yeah, she has a friend
yeah.
who has a 7-year-old son. She's like, I think it's about right time now to tell him he was adopted. So she's like, "So you've been
Ooh,
lying to him for 7 years, have you?" You know, like,
yeah. I wouldn't want to have that discussion. I
no.
just think it becomes so much a part of their understanding. Like, I remember having a conversation with my son when he was a teenager already, and we were talking about closed adoptions. And he says, "Well, why would
Mm.
anyone want to do that?" Right.
Mhm.
And I said,
Yep.
"Well, some people feel like, it might cause confusion for the child." Right. And he
Yeah.
was just like, "Well, yeah, but she's not like my mom." She's my birth mom, but she's not my mom. Right. And
Right, right.
so I think, yeah, but I still find lots of people. One of the things that bothers me the most, I think, that where people misunderstand is their reaction to birth mothers who
Mm.
place babies for adoption.
Mhm.
The things that have been said to my children's birth mothers are horrendous. Like,
No.
and I think it makes it so difficult for birth mothers to make that choice because they're like, "Oh, didn't you love your baby? Oh, I guess you were kind of selfish. You wanted to go on and live your own life without being tied down." Right? Like, just that, um,
Those are terrible.
yeah,
But I
so
could see people
just,
saying it, like, completely.
well,
Yeah,
yes, and just like imply like really terrible things, which made it really difficult, like for them to share,
for
that they
sure.
had raised a child for adoption. And so I think sometimes some of the negativity out there towards adoption, a lot of times when you hear, you know, what should somebody do when a young teenage girl who finds herself with an unplanned pregnancy, I think they they don't they don't even consider adoption as an option because people have heard so many they've
Yeah,
heard so many, terrible things said to people. And I would
yeah.
say that, like, and I am in no way saying that birth mothers who decide to keep their children are selfish. They're not, like it's just a horrible decision to have to make, right? Like,
Absolutely.
so are you going to live the rest of your life loving this child and not being able to be a part of their life? Um, or but what if you really can't care for them, right? And then you're going to feel guilty that you can't give them the life you'd hope to. Like, it's just so difficult. And I know at one point our birth mother, my son's birth mother, did say to us, she said, "I didn't think I would ever be happy again, but she said, you might think you saved CJ, but you saved me." She said to me once, and we didn't save her, but her perception was because she could still know about him, right? She didn't have to be wondering, like, is he okay? Is he happy? Did I do the right
Yeah.
thing? Like, what if he's
Yes.
miserable out there somewhere? What if he died and I don't even know? Like, all
Or
those
what
sorts
if
of
I
things.
gave him
Can you
to an
imagine?
abusive family, right? Like, what if what I
Yeah,
could have given him isn't as bad as what he went into? Because
yeah.
unfortunately, we hear too
Or
many
like,
stories of that as well.
and can you imagine, like, walking downtown and looking at kids that age and thinking, "Oh, is that my," like, and not knowing, like, I can't even fathom that.
Mhm.
And so, and for me, it was like it was an easy decision to have an open adoption in a way because I wanted my my children to not feel rejected, right?
Right.
They weren't given
Yeah,
up. They were
right.
placed in my care. They went from their birth mother's loving arms to mine, right?
That's a
There was
fabulous point
no,
of view.
yeah, like
Um,
they were entrusted to my care by their loving birth mothers. And so right from the beginning, like, I think a lot of adoptive moms maybe don't realize, like, you control how the story is told to your child. So
yes.
you have a lot of power over how
Oh,
your
yeah.
child's going to perceive the birth mother, right? So
Mhm.
I
Yep.
think it's really important, like, to have that relationship with the birth mother directly,
Mhm.
so that neither of you would hurt each other. Like, I feel like my children's birth mothers would never intentionally hurt me. and I would never intentionally hurt them.
Right.
I hope I haven't. I may have at some point said or done something, but you control the narrative, right? So my narrative to my kids was always they loved you, and they loved you so
Mhm.
much that
Mhm.
they they couldn't give you the life they wanted you to have. And so I don't feel like my kids had any resentment. There were no like negative feelings towards their birth mothers.
Oh,
Um,
that's wonderful. There was no feeling of abandonment and that kind of thing?
I
Because
don't
that's
think
something that
so, unless they haven't been honest with me about that. But we have talked about it,
oh, good,
and
okay.
I think it's always been just a part of their who they are, right?
Yes. Because
So
you normalized it so much, because it was demystified
yeah,
and not this big secret that everybody had to keep,
mhm,
"Don't tell anyone you're adopted." It wasn't that's not what it was, right?
yeah.
There was
There
no
was a
shame.
little bit there was a little bit of so when we moved to we had lived in Saskatoon, and then when we moved out to the community we live in now, which is a small community where my husband
Mhm,
and I both grew up, um, where they were 7 and 10, and so
mhm,
then we had a discussion about, do you want people to know? But then, and they were like, well, not really, or they would want to share it as they
right.
saw fit, not necessary.
Yeah,
But there were so many people in the community that knew because they knew us, right?
right.
And it was a huge celebration when my son was born, right? I remember
Yeah.
having him dedicated in church, and I thought it was going to be this super emotional moment when you're having like a baby dedication. But the pastor at that time, it was the year that the Lion King movie came out. And
Oh, yeah.
yes, that's what he did. He held him up, he
Was
like held him up to the
that
audience
Ralph?
like he was Simba or something. And
Was that
all that
Ralph,
came
the
in my
pastor?
head is, pardon me? Pardon
Was
me?
that Ralph? Was the pastor
No,
Ralph? Oh,
no,
okay.
no, it was in Saskatoon. We were attending a
Oh,
church in
okay,
Saskatoon. And
okay.
and and so I'm standing up there, and you think it's going to be this emotional kind of moment, and all I can hear is, and the circle of life. It just it's ringing through my head, so that I'm kind of trying to not laugh and chuckling,
Yeah.
but yeah. I mean, there was
Exactly.
such a
Yeah.
celebration that like people knew, but I think their friends didn't know for a while until
Mm,
they kind of chose to share it. So
right.
when they felt like they wanted to, then they would share it with their friends. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and it would be more of a, "Oh, by the way," rather than, "This is
Yeah.
a secret you have to keep," you know,
Yeah. Yeah.
which would be much easier in my experience. That would have been much
Yeah.
easier to be able to do. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think I'd be very good
Okay.
at keeping secrets. So I can keep
I'm
sad secrets. I can keep like when there's something
okay.
difficult, like I don't
Mm.
have any trouble keeping that secret, but happy news is really hard to keep secret.
It is, you just wanna spread
Yeah.
it, right?
Mhm.
Yes, I'm the same
Mhm.
way. Yeah, when I buy somebody a gift, it's like, I have to.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. And now you're a grandma.
I'm
You've
a
got
grandma. Yeah, what a blessing.
2
It
grandbabies?
I know, and I think it was funny because like almost all of our friends had kids before we did, right? A good like
Mhm.
5, 6 years before we did. And so we had waited for kids. But when it came to grandbabies, I didn't even have to ask or wait. We had them pretty quickly. And
Oh,
so
wow.
they've just been like icing on the cake. They're
For
just the
sure.
best.
Yes.
Yeah.
Your son
And
has children, your
we're
daughter does not yet, is that right?
right.
Your
Yeah.
son has
No.
kids, not your daughter. Okay. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. My
Yeah.
daughter's just recently married. Yeah. So
Yes.
it'll be
Yeah.
interesting to see, when that time comes, what that's like, because I haven't been through a pregnancy. And
Right.
so it's just like, it'll be interesting to see, yeah, when that time
Yeah.
comes for them to go through that.
Yeah. And again, it's like if they have children, or if they
Yeah,
choose to have children. Like
that's right.
when my husband and I were young, like yourselves, we went through a
Mhm.
lot of, oh, we're young, we can do this, no problem. And again, at about 25, it's like, okay, let's try, let's see what
Yeah.
happens. And it just didn't work. And it didn't work,
Mm,
and it didn't work. We had to go on drugs, and drugs
yeah.
helped. That was enough
Yeah.
for us.
Yeah.
Um, but then when our second daughter came around, it was like we were thinking, okay, it took us a long time to get pregnant with our first, and God's like,
Yeah.
here's
Oh,
another one. So
well,
yeah,
I have a friend who used to always say the Lord opens and closes your womb.
that's
So like
exactly right.
we think we're ultimately in control, but we're not. And I used to, it's funny because then after all the years of wanting to have babies, then all of a sudden I'm like 40-ish and I'm like,
Yeah,
okay, I don't really want one now, right?
no, nope,
And
that's
then
right.
but then you're kind of like, you don't want to say that too loud because I think God has a sense of humor. So I'm like,
Oh, he sure does. Yeah, absolutely.
but he chose not to give us another one, so that's okay.
Well, and
That's okay.
nowhere in the Bible does it say, oops, somebody got pregnant. It was always,
No.
and God opened
Yeah.
and God caused. And yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
that's yeah, early on. One miscarriage for me, but it
Mm,
was I didn't even know I was pregnant at the time.
mm,
So it was hard after. It wasn't
yeah.
hard kind
Mm,
of coming
yeah.
up to it. I didn't realize what was going on. But at
Yeah.
the same time, once it was time to have children, we thought, well, we've got pregnant once, it's going to happen, right?
Yeah.
And it just didn't.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that's, yeah, it's just, infertility is just, it's a very, very difficult experience. And it seems like, we're not alone in that these days, right? There's lots of
that's
people
for
who
sure.
need to be going through that.
Yeah. Well, and
So,
then there was always the question, don't you want kids? Why aren't you having kids yet?
yeah.
And then there's the parents. I don't think my mom, and I'm pretty sure Doug's mom wasn't like this. Like, when are you giving us grandbabies? We want grandbabies. Come on,
Oh,
get on it.
yeah.
And I will never do that to my children, ever,
No,
because
no.
people do say that kind of stuff, and it is so hurtful. Like, how do they know
Yeah.
that you're trying and you just can't? How do they know that you
Yeah.
haven't had miscarriage after miscarriage? Or maybe what
Yeah.
if you just don't want to? Are you
Yeah.
selfish for not wanting to have children? No.
Yeah.
Like it's
Yeah.
yeah. Oh
Yeah.
well.
I know
Yeah.
it makes me think though, okay, so this is an area where I've been on the receiving end of those things. So, but are there other experiences in life that I haven't had where I say
Mhm.
insensitive things to people, right? Like, and
Yeah.
sometimes, you find yourself saying it and the minute it's out of your mouth, you think,
It's
well,
like,
that was that
put
wrong
that
thing
back.
to say, and you try to take
Yes.
it back and it's hard. And sometimes, like for me, it depended on the day, right? Like
Mm.
some days it was easier to extend grace and say, oh, they
Mhm.
don't know, right? So especially when
Yeah.
people didn't know, it was easier for
Right.
me to forgive comments for people who didn't know than it
Yep.
was I had confided in somebody that we were going through
Mhm.
and then they said
Yeah.
something insensitive that I found harder to forgive.
Much, much more hurtful for sure.
But
Yeah.
I did find, and everybody's different in how they respond, but I found that it was in some ways more painful when we kept it a secret. Once
Mm.
we were more open with people about it, then you also open yourself up to the support that they can offer. So yes, there were a
Absolutely.
few people who said hurtful things, but for the most part, people were very supportive and caring, um, and so that did help, right?
That's
When you're going
wonderful.
through it, yeah.
Oh, for
I remember
sure.
one of my
Yes.
coworkers getting pregnant with her third child, and she waited until Everybody else had left the office and just the two of us were there. And she came to me and she's so sweet. And she starts to cry and she says, like, I just wanted to tell you personally that I'm pregnant. And I said, well, that's great news. And she said, I'm so sorry, Cheryl. And I'm like, don't be sorry. Like, it's not like you're using up all the babies. It's not like you're getting pregnant and having one.
I hadn't thought of it that way, but yeah.
When people, what bothered me was when people didn't appreciate their kids, right?
Yes.
So
Yeah.
like people who love their kids and were excited to be pregnant and have kids, I could celebrate with them. What was hard was when people made negative comments about their kids or wishing they didn't have them. That was tough.
Yeah.
Tougher.
Yeah. I found the same thing. It was when we were first trying, it was kind of the beginning of news groups and stuff like that on the internet.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was on a couple of news groups for infertility, and on
Yeah.
one in particular, these women started out, very supportive of each other and loving. And then one person made a comment, "Oh, I saw a lady at Walmart today. She was yelling at her kid. She doesn't deserve that child." And that was it. And
Oh,
then it went back to
yeah.
normal. And then it was more and more, and then it just
Mm,
piled on. And I got to the point, I had to get to the point where I had to be okay with not having kids, or I would become
yeah.
bitter like that. And I was
Yeah.
not going to let myself do that. So,
Yeah.
yeah, because we had discussed, and my husband, he's like, I don't think I want to adopt. Like, really?
Mm,
Yeah, no, I
yeah.
don't think I do. I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
well, okay then. We could have labradoodles. We'll have something.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, so
I
I
was
had
a
to become
great
okay.
auntie before I had kids.
That's wonderful.
I yeah, like I just poured all of my love and attention into my nieces and nephews.
Well, that's great.
Then I
How many
wasn't
nieces
quite,
and
I wasn't quite as great to the nieces and nephews that came afterwards because I was busy. But I gave them
yeah,
but I gave them a cousin, so it kind of evened
that's
things
right.
out.
And look at the cousins you gave them. Goodness
I
gracious.
know. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. Um, Mary is anybody else? Crystal, if you're still in the chat, do you have any questions at all or comments? Mary from Blessed to Crochet has been commenting quite regularly,
Mhm.
and she's right. God can move mountains, and she's going to be with me on the 5th, so next Tuesday. She's going to be with me with her daughter, and we're going to be talking about autism and what it's like growing
Mm.
up with autism. And she's been
Mm.
on my show already about having fibromyalgia. So not
Mm.
only does she have a child with autism, but also with an autoimmune disease at the same time.
Mm.
So that's going to be an interesting conversation we're going to have.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Mhm.
and yeah, I don't, oh man, I don't know how people can do this without faith. I really don't,
Mm.
because it's only through faith that I've been able to have as much sanity, I guess, as I have. Um,
Mhm.
and he has kept me from being bitter, like just
Mhm.
I have had to keep asking God, please soften my heart toward
Mm.
whatever. And he does
Yeah.
every time,
Mhm.
every time.
Well,
So
you
yeah.
see, I saw people go through infertility, and you're right, it changed them into different people. They lost
Hmm.
friendships. Sometimes, like marriages were like damaged beyond repair in the
Yeah.
quest for a baby, right?
Yes, absolutely.
And I have to admit, I was even impacted by some of the Bible stories of, where they were so desperate for a baby that they would do anything for a baby, like Sarah and Abraham, right? And I'm like,
Yep.
okay, I don't want, if this
No
is
Hagar in
truly
my
what,
life.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I didn't like it. And I remember clearly having conversations with God where I'm crying and saying, I don't like this. but but
Yeah.
I but he blessed me with, intellectually, I did still always believe that there was a God, that he had a plan for my life, and that he was a
Hmm.
good God and it was a good plan. So
Yeah.
that's what saw me through it. And so I wasn't accepting of it. Like I railed against it because I
Oh, for sure.
didn't
Yeah.
like it. I don't like
Yeah.
your plan, God. I don't want this plan. Please give me a different one.
Yes,
um,
absolutely.
and
We'll try
so
plan B.
I'm in that position now where I can see the why. Like
Yes.
my feeling is that God didn't allow me to become pregnant because He knew that He had these children for us,
Mhm.
and that not so much that the children needed us, because to be honest with you, their birth mothers would have done a great job of raising them has they chosen to keep them. Um,
Yeah.
but um, but I think their birth mothers needed us,
Yes.
because
Yeah,
they felt, yeah, that they felt a sense of peace, that their children were being well cared for. So I got to see like the why, but in life we don't always get to see the why, right? So
no, we don't.
sometimes there are things that are uh, part of the plan for our lives, and we it's much easier when you see the why. So now I'm like, oh, why didn't I wait better? Like, should I done a better job of waiting? Well, it's easy to wait if you know what the outcome is,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
not so
yeah, it's
much
much
when you
tougher.
don't. So that's the challenge
Yeah,
now when life, brings me situations where I need to wait. I'm learning
yeah,
still to be more trusting of God in the whole process,
for
that He'll
sure,
work it out for
absolutely.
me for good. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that and not only did he work things out for you, but you can now
Mhm.
touch other people. You can talk to
Mm.
young men and women who are going through
Mhm.
infertility or who are waiting for adoption or, so
Mhm.
many of these other experiences. And as a public health nurse, you can just be that much more
Mhm.
compassionate to young mums
Mhm.
who are
Mhm.
wondering, should I or shouldn't I? Give
Mhm.
an extra bit of wisdom to these people. And, I
Mhm.
think that's a large part of God's plan for these things as well.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, I
Yeah,
agree.
yeah. Well, Cheryl, thank you so much for joining me tonight.
Mhm. Oh, you're
It's
welcome.
wonderful. It's been wonderful hearing your journey, and,
Thank you.
I appreciate your time.
Thank you,
I'll see
Kim.
you later.
Bye-bye.
Alright, have a great night.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thanks, bye-bye.